You mean to tell me there's kicker news like 2 days in a row in June? Getting downright spoiled this year. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. Today, I decided, everything that I've been asked lately in the lives and even a bunch of the comments has been all about who makes the 53. And I said that I would do one before training camp began. So since that was basically all the questions on Wednesday, let's just do it now. So we're going to go through what is my pre-training camp 53-man roster for the Green Bay Packers. This is not necessarily what I would do. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but this is what I think the Packers, as of right now, are looking at doing. Of course, things are subject to change. But of course, before we get to that, we do have one bit of news, as the Packers did actually make a transaction. This was completed yesterday. They wound up claiming James Turner off of waivers from the Detroit Lions. The Lions recently signed Jake Bates, the UFL superstar who made the 60-yard field goal. Well, in turn, then they released James Turner. He was a UDFA. It was signed to the Lions right after the draft, was expected to compete for their starting kicking job. Well, no longer. And then the Packers, a couple days ago, they did also cut Jack Podlesny. We talked about that before on Wednesday. Gotta say, Turner, Podlesny, when you look at their collegiate stats, fairly similar. It may just be viewed that Turner actually has a higher ceiling, was a touch more consistent, seems to have just a little bit more range than Podlesny, but still kind of the same tail between these two kickers. Fairly limited in their range, but also highly accurate from short, or especially on extra points. For background, there is Turner's collegiate stats. He started out 3 years at Louisville. You can tell, even his freshman year, his first year kicking, 100% on extra points, a feat he never really matched again in college. But overall, very, very accurate numbers. 2021, obviously not his best season, only 14 of 22 on field goals for Louisville. But you also see there the longs listed. The long of only 50 yards. 46, 48. 50 was again his long this last year after he had transferred to the University of Michigan, wound up winning a national championship this year, wound up kicking 66 extra points this year, 18 to 21 on field goals, a very strong year, but again, that long of 50, he did it 3 times, but still kind of a capped out long that Turner has hit collegiately. So I am a little surprised that the Packers opted to bring in a third kicker. We talked on Wednesday night about how, they got rid of Jack Podlesny, so they're preparing to move into camp with only 2 kickers, which makes a lot of sense because there's only so many kicking reps to go around. LaFleur isn't going to dedicate that much time to kicking reps in these valuable training camp practices. Well, now we'll see. It still feels weird that they may bring 3 into camp, but that's the way the roster stands right now. Speaking of the roster, there is still, even after claiming Turner, there is still 1 open roster spot. The roster currently sits at 90, with Ndumagu included. They can go up to 91. So there is still an open roster spot. We'll have to see if something comes down the line. So without anything else, let's hit it. This is the 53-man roster. Now, I've done this before, did it right after the draft. If you recall, even if you were around last year when I did them a few times, I like to normally make this a 2-part series, but I got plans for Monday. I'm planned out for content through training camp beginning, so I didn't want to make this a 2-parter. So I am going to go a little bit more brief in the presentation of the positions themselves as we go through this. But you're going to see, there are some very, very tough calls to be had. Regardless, still, we can all probably agree on 47, 48 of the spots being pretty gosh darn secured at this juncture. What the real questions are what are those last 5, maybe 6 spots? And before we really dive in, I want you to keep in mind a couple things. One, every team has day 3 steals that they fall in love with. Every fan base has convinced themselves that a number of day 3 picks were absolute steals. Now, for the Packers, historically, it's been fairly true. But the point remains that every fan base, every team has players that they chose for a reason. Okay, so bear that in mind. Also, there's a lot more to building a roster than just, is this guy a better wide receiver, then this other guy. You also got to take into account what injuries will come up for during camp. We can't know that yet, obviously. But also whether they have a specific role in mind for a player. Like, again, talking about the wide receiver position, is someone specialized in something that no one else in the roster can do. Maybe they stick around. And of course, special teams plays a very important factor, especially for the Packers, since Rich Bisaccia came around. So I'm just going to say it. There are a couple cuts in here, a couple releases that I hate. Did not like having to do them, but ultimately that's a good thing. It means that the Packers have a deep roster. The offensive line, you'll see that. That's just an outright cluster. I'm not sure anyone knows what's going to happen there. They got a lot of bodies that they are going to sort through. So a little bit of background before we dive into the actual picks themselves. I wanted to list here for you what the Packers have done over the last 3 years. This is post-COVID when a lot of rules changed. The Packers seem to have a certain way of doing things in building their 53. For instance, 2 quarterbacks. If you're looking on the screen there, the first year closest to positions, that's 2023, then 2022, then 2021. Also, the asterisk is a little bit of gamesmanship that the Packers like to do every year, but you can tell every position is just within one of the year prior. And I don't expect that really to change, even going from Joe Barry's defense to Jeff Hafley's defense. In terms of some of these asterisks, like last year, keep in mind, they cut Matt Orzik, but they did that so then they could put Luke Tenuta on IR, and then they signed Orzik right back. That's why those numbers aren't completely accurate. And then in 2021, the asterisks there were because they only kept 52 on their initial roster and then immediately worked out a trade for Corey Bojorquez. So like the initial 53 always has a little bit of play in it. So let's get right to it. The offense. The playmakers. Quarterback, I think they wind up keeping 2. Obviously, Jordan Love, but then besides that, I think Sean Clifford. Yes, to this point, 7th round pick, Michael Pratt has outplayed Clifford. Much was made about Sean Clifford's 4 interceptions during the mandatory minicamp. And there's been a lot of reporting of Pratt doing incredibly well thus far. I'm not going to deny that at all, but the Packers adore Sean Clifford, and Pratt did slip to day 3 for a reason. A lot of people thought he would go round 3, maybe round 4. He was there later on for a reason. Teams repeatedly passed on him. In order for him to really kind of change that, I think he'd have to continue to outplay Clifford even in the preseason. Keep in mind, Clifford got the gamer tag from Tom Clements earlier in the offseason, so not sure that they're all that worried about Clifford pressing a bit much in practice. He already knows the offense. He has the traits and the intangibles that they adore. And it's not to say that Pratt doesn't. It's just we know these things with Clifford for sure. So this very well could change. I would not be shocked at all. I do expect them to just keep 2 quarterbacks, though, which did get a little interesting on the waiver wire. But I do expect them to keep that trend going of keeping 2. And I got to say, I think it's still going to be Clifford. Looking at the running back position, Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, pretty much locks. But then also, I think A.J. Dillon is the one to make the roster. I don't see them keeping 4 running backs. I think Wilson is probably a step behind. Keep in mind, Dillon is still probably the best pass protector on the team. He knows the offense inside and out. And he's come back to minicamp at the very least in tremendous shape. He looks better than we've seen him in a while for sure. Plus, pair that with the contract that he's back on, that sweetheart deal that Dillon and the Packers worked out. I think Emmanuel Wilson is a step behind A.J. Dillon for that last running back spot. Wilson, this camp, this preseason, is probably going to have to set the world on fire again or prove that he learned every single thing that the Packers wanted to improve upon, including pass protection in order to oust Dillon. Looking at the wide receiver position, I do think they keep 6. 4, definitely locks. Watson, Dobbs, Reed, Wicks. 5, pretty sure that's going to be a lock. Bo Melton. The way that Matt LaFleur has complimented Bo Melton thus far throughout the offseason. The fact that Melton is revered as one of the best run-blocking wide receivers on the team. PFF even graded him out that way. It seems a lot, especially taking into account special teams contributions and everything else, that Melton is very much a lock at this point. Wide receiver 6 is where it begins to get interesting because Malik Heath also has been complimented by LaFleur, but yet competing for that wide receiver 6 spot, you got Samari Toure. Don't forget about him. He's still there. Or even how about Grant DuBose, last year's 7th round pick, or even other UDFAs. In my opinion, and I think the Packers' opinion, Malik Heath seems to be a cut above them because of the roles that he fills, because of the superior nature that he is as a run blocker compared to DuBose and Toure. The fact that Heath actually plays teams, which is something Toure has never really gotten around to. I think Malik Heath is a cut above. I think he holds as wide receiver 6. The tight end spot keeping 4. Obviously Musgrave, Kraft. Then it gets a little interesting. I think Sims is pretty much there, but Tyler Davis still coming back from last year's knee injury. I won't be shocked at all if this last tight end spot would go to Henry Pearson. Pearson is by far the purest H-back, fullback, move tight end, whatever semantic you want to use. I think Pearson is by far the purest of them on the 90-man roster. But... and I will note too, Pearson got some play with the ones at a couple of the minicamp sessions in that role. So keep that in mind. But they just seem to really love Tyler Davis. He was re-signed again. Rich Bisaccia has referred to him in the past as his right hand. He led the team in special team snaps in 2022. Keep in mind, for Rich Bisaccia, going back at least 15 years in his coaching career, a tight end has almost always been in the top 2 of special team snaps for Rich Bisaccia-led units. Tyler Davis fit the bill in 2022. I think if he were healthy last year, he would have done it again, and I think he will do it again this year in 2024. Plus, also, LaFleur, when he talked glowingly about Tyler Davis last offseason, made it sound as though Davis was going to have a definitive role in the offense before his injury as well. So if Tyler Davis is healthy, I think that last spot is going to go to him. But Henry Pearson, very much an acknowledged player here, someone who very well could, with a strong camp, or prove that his job as a move tight end cannot be filled by these other guys, cannot be pieced together from other positions, then we might very well be having a different conversation Henry Pearson could find himself in. Now, looking at the big boys, the offensive line. This is different than the video that I put out after the draft where I was trying to put together a 53. I really think they keep 10 total offensive linemen. They seem to do it every year. Last year, they even did it with putting Tenuta on IR. They go on to keeping 11, then it got knocked down to 10. So I think they wind up keeping 10. Now, for the purposes of this, I did split between what I think the starters will be versus what I think the bench will be. Starters, I still think it's going to be Rasheed Walker, left tackle, Elton Jenkins, left guard, Josh Myers, center, Jordan Morgan, right guard, and then Zach Tom at right tackle, assuming health, especially from Zach Tom. Jordan Morgan has played, he seemed to play the most at minicamp, left tackle, and right guard. I think right guard is where he's going to be comfiest for now. Longer term, I think he still plays tackle. But given the Packers personnel that wants to put the best 5 out there, I think right guard is the spot for him. I think he's a starter. Unless Sean Ryan just puts it all together and then Jordan Morgan goes compete with Rasheed Walker at left tackle, but I don't see that happening. Then looking at the bench, and this is a mess from trying to predict what this is going to be, especially keep in mind that in minicamp we haven't seen these guys really block a whole lot yet. It's one of the hardest things to assess at minicamp because they're not wearing pads, they're not hitting each other. They're basically just standing up and hoping the dudes don't blow right by them, right? So keep that in mind here too. We've not seen these guys in full. But as for the bench, I think Andre Dillard, Matt LaFleur has talked repeatedly, reminding the press that Andre Dillard was a first-round pick for a reason, that he's a perfect schematic fit for what they want to do. Yeah, he was signed on a 1-year cheapy deal, but it really feels like Matt LaFleur loves Andre Dillard, and that should mean quite a lot. I think Dillard may be the swingiest swing tackle they've got. Okay, but I say that with the parentheses of if Walker or Tom go down, we might see Jenkins or Morgan kick out, and then an interior guy like Sean Ryan go in. Dillard may just wind up being tackle 3 by default. Then Donovan Jennings, the UDFA. They gave him a major commitment. And I think he's pretty ready to play, even converting from a tackle in college to being a guard in the NFL. They loved him in the pre-draft process. They heavily committed to him with a 6-figure signing bonus, even as a UDFA. I think he's one of the more polished depth offensive line pieces on the team. I think he winds up making it. Then you've got Jacob Monk, who certainly is a lock. Sean Ryan, definitely a lock at this point. And then I think this is the spot that is truly up for grabs. Now, I did put Caleb Jones here for now because I think they're going to want to keep another player who can play tackle. But y'all know how I feel about him. But I think Royce Newman stands a chance. And then you still have Travis Glover. Like I've talked before about how, when comping all the youth on the offensive line, Glover seems to maybe be the high ceiling raw one, the one who maybe will need some development. Well, maybe they choose to put him on the 53 and then never activate him. Maybe. But they've done that with Caleb Jones for the last 2 years, and they seem to really like Caleb Jones. They've kept him on the active roster for 2 years. He's on the Yosh Nijman trajectory almost to a T. And they just really seem to see something with Caleb Jones, whether it's his size that just can't be replicated or whatever it may be. So I guess just right now, no, I don't have a good reason for including Caleb Jones over, Royce Newman, over Luke Tenuta, for instance. Tenuta and Jones always seem to be matched together. It's just kind of a gut thing. But I think they keep 10 offensive linemen. As of right now, I've got that last spot going to Caleb Jones. Would not be shocked at all if it's a different individual. Now, let's turn things over to the defense. And yeah, the defensive tackles, let's call them that, interior linemen, traditional D-line from the 3-4, however you want to call them, whatever nomenclature you want to use, the big dudes on the line, I think they're going to wind up keeping 5. Again, a change from the video that I put out after the draft. Almost every year, they've kept 6 defensive linemen or defensive tackles. This year, I think they get away with 5, moving to a 4-3 defense. And I think it's going to be Kenny Clark, Devontae White, TJ Slayton, Carl Brooks, Kobe Wooden. Those 5 seem like locks. If they're going to keep a 6th, it's going to be like a stretch to do so in the form of like a Jonathan Ford, Esther, the Waiga, like another UDFA that they got. But these 5, I think this is one of the easiest spots on the team now to predict. I think they wind up keeping 5. At edge, I think that's a 5 spot as well. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbare, they are locky locks. They're on the roster. But then number 5 becomes a little bit of a conversation. And I'm putting Brenton Cox Jr. here because it's really like a trades pick. From everything that's been reported, he did have a pretty nice minicamp. No, he didn't have sack after sack after sack like we saw reported for some guys, but the potential still seems sky high. The athletic traits still so apparent. I wouldn't be shocked if Deslin Alexander sets the world on fire. He got repeated sacks in minicamp. If he does that all the way through training camp and in preseason games, he's lighting dudes up, then maybe it's him. Maybe Keyshawn Banks makes another strong training camp impression. But Brenton Cox Jr., the potential, the athleticism, the ceiling, really seems like he's the top one, seems a cut above. Keep in mind, too, there's still even Kenneth Adumago, who, maybe he could wind up on the defensive line, but he still seems a ways off, even with his 3-sack performance during the mandatory minicamp. So let's give it to Brenton Cox Jr. Now, the linebacker spot. And this is one that I went a little back and forth on. I think all 5 of the individuals that I have listed there, Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie. First, I think those are your starters in 4-3 base. But then you've got Eric Wilson and Teron Hopper. I think that those 5 are pretty definitive locks. Brian Gutekunst has talked in the past about potentially with the switch to 4-3, maybe we need to keep more depth at linebacker, similarly to what they would do with the defensive line, always keeping 6 defensive linemen in the 3-4. Maybe now they would keep more depth at linebacker. But then my question becomes, who? Who are you keeping beyond these 5? Because is it Christian Welch? Because Welch, to this point in his career, has really been renowned as a special teamer, which is what most people factor in Teron Harper to do mostly as a rookie, is be a teamer with some special packages maybe he gets on the field for. And Eric Wilson, one of your best special teams players for the last 2 years, who you chose to bring back again this offseason. So where exactly does Welch fit into this? Because they've never really trusted Welch to play on defense. So does he really serve the purpose of adding depth to the linebacker spot if you're not really willing to trust him to play defense anyway? See the point that I'm making? So I would rather keep 5 here and then keep someone else at a different position. And I think that's what eventually the Packers are going to see. I do think Welch could very well be added to the practice squad, could be one of those guys that is frequently called up using those game day elevations, certainly would fill in an injury, but I think they're going to wind up keeping 5. I think they'll see the light. And then at the cornerback spot, oh God, I hate this. I'm not going to lie to y'all. I don't like this one. I don't like it at all. They got too many talented guys. But at corner, I think they're going to keep 5. Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, and Corey Ballantyne. And you may be thinking, where's Kalen King? Where is the 7th round pick from Penn State that everyone has revered as one of the top steals in this entire draft? How dare you not include him Yeah, I also feel dirty if it makes you feel better at all. But look, it's a numbers game, right? If you're going to wind up keeping 6 corners, what does it mean somewhere else that you have to subtract? Are you only going to keep 4 at one of the front 7 spots on the defense? Or are you only going to keep 9 offensive linemen this year? How about 5 wide receivers? Can't see him doing that either. So something's got to give somewhere. And the thing is, Kalen King does not have a world of special teams experience. And certainly for cornerback 6, that's something that they'd be looking for. Corey Ballantyne used to be cornerback 6. And he played a ton of special teams. And then last year, when he was kind of pushed into duty because of injuries, played a very admirable corner. And then they re-signed him this year, gave him even some guaranteed money in that contract. I think he is going to make this roster. But King, I'm not sure you can say all the same things for. You know, it's a lack of special teams for King. King, very, very much a worthwhile project. I still think he could have a tremendous career. But again, I think this is one guy who you let go for now. Maybe we see some gamesmanship on the initial 53, but kind of like Pratt, great future ahead. But the Packers are a very deep team, and something eventually has to give. So I think Kalen King works to be the odd man out here. He's just a part of the future at the cornerback spot, assuming they can retain him. And then safety, a very important position for Jeff Hafley. Certainly a more important position than we ever saw under Joe Barry. We've talked about that before, how the safety position under Barry was very devalued, and the front office treated it as such. It just wasn't that important of a spot. With Hafley, it's a very important spot. Suddenly you need guys here, and you need guys who can play. So let's trot out 3 rookies. Regardless, you got one of the top safeties in the league in Xavier McKinney. Then you got Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, Keaton Oladapo. I think those 4 are absolutely locks to make the roster, assuming health. Oladapo should be ready by camp with that broken toe and the toe injury he sustained. Should be ready. Evan Williams, I do think, is a very underrated player from the draft picks perspective. He's one of those guys that, like, after he was drafted, I kind of went, who? And then looked into him more and, oh, okay, now I see it. Why didn't more people talk about him before? I do think he's going to do good things for the Packers. But then for that 5th safety spot, I think Anthony Johnson Jr. is the guy. Keep in mind, this is only going to be his 3rd year playing safety. Collegiately, he played more corner than he did safety. 4 years at corner, 1 year at safety. And last year, he was pushed into the starting spot a couple times and did make some plays along with some misjudgments at the safety position. But pair that with the fact that he does actually play special teams, the fact that Matt LaFleur has talked about his growth this offseason, how he's done everything that he needs to do, and the fact that at mandatory minicamp, whenever Xavier McKinney was excused, whenever Bullard was spending time with the rookies, who was it that was there starting with the ones at safety? Anthony Johnson Jr. So I think he's there. I don't feel great about leaving off Benny Sapp. I don't feel great about even leaving off Zane Anderson because he is the Dallin Levitt replacement, the special teams ace at the safety spot. But hey, numbers are what they are, and I can't see them keeping only 9 offensive linemen or doing the thing where they only keep 2 running backs again this year in favor of keeping a Zane Anderson or a Benny Sapp. Anthony Johnson Jr., another thing going for him in this mold is realistically, if you look at the other names there, Bullard is probably going to be starting opposite McKinney. If you slate in mentally, I know they want to be interchangeable, but they'll still have primary functions. If McKinney is the post safety, Bullard then is your little bit more of a strong safety type, which is absolutely what Evan Williams is, which is absolutely what Keaton Oladapo is. Anthony Johnson Jr. probably is the backup post safety in that regard, much like Benny Sapp would be as well. So I think that goes in his favor as well. I think that's what you're looking at for 5 safeties. So that brings us to 25 total for the offense, 25 total for the defense, something that the Packers have done before, a perfectly even split. Last time they did that was 2022. Then looking at the specialists, 3 special teamers. Anders Carlson, I still think that he holds on to the job, even with the addition that they recently made off the waiver claim with the Lions that I talked about at the top. Even against Greg Joseph, you want Carlson to win this job from a contract standpoint, from a youth standpoint. Everything should be going in his favor. We all should want Carlson to just freaking get it. here's hoping, right? So I think he does get the job. Then Dan Whelan, the Irishman at punter. He had an exceptional first season as the Packers punter. He's obviously the only punter left on the roster. Job's his. And then at long snapper, I do think Peter Bowden from the University of Wisconsin. I think he edges out Orzik. Orzik was just not the answer at long snapper that the Packers were hoping for last year. He was inconsistent. Hopefully with Bowden, one of the top collegiate long snappers for the last couple of years. Dane Brugler's top long snapper from the Beast. Hopefully they have this all figured out. Last time we heard Bisaccia talk, he mentioned how Bowden was still working on his snap velocity. Get working on that, Bowden, because we're all pulling for you. So there you have it. The Packers 53-man roster as it stands right now. In my opinion, this is what the Packers will do. Obviously, still a very, very long way to go, but I do hope that this answers a bunch of the questions that are out there from the lives and from the comments about what I've been thinking the Packers will do. Of course, with the gigantic asterisk of subject to change. And we will see once training camp finally begins on July 22nd. I can't wait. I'll be there. I'll be reporting back to you darn near every single day during training camp. So thanks so much for joining me here on Lombardi Time Brews. I do hope you have an absolutely fantastic weekend. I'll see you on Monday. Monday's going to be a fun episode. Claudia is going to be rejoining us here. So really looking forward to that. Should be a little bit lighter, a little bit more fun of an episode. So I'll see you then. But until then, have a great weekend, and as always, go Pack Go.